Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we turn back to our favorite regressive punching bag, MTV Decoded, hosted by Francesca Ramsey, of course. This time Franny and crew are talking about slut shaming and going all sex positive and stuff. Something like that. Their video is called The Virginity Double Standard. Check this bullshit out.
Since as long as we can remember, society has run by the same old high school standards. Male virgin, a loser. Female virgin, an angel from above. What the f*** is up with that?
Well, it's pretty simple, Francesca. If you've ever been out in the real world before, you would know. It's harder for guys to get laid. Having sex for a man means you have to have game. You gotta clean yourself up, put yourself out there, flirt, and then seduce a woman into falling for you. That takes work, so if guys are good at it, they get praise, because it's a talent and skill that is worthy of having. Women, on the other hand, have a much more passive role when it comes to getting laid. Sure, a girl can go out and pursue partners like how guys do, but typically, girls don't need to do this at all. Most women of age will get guys flirting with them and virtually offering them sex all the time. So for girls, it's easier to get laid, and thus it's not a virtue if you're sleeping around. It's like saying someone is talented because they ate chocolate cake every day while they were working at a bakery. Well, of course they ate it. It was right in front of their face every day. Just like how sex is for many women. There's also a much more significant reason women aren't encouraged to sleep around as much in society. It's because they can get pregnant. Sex offers a lot more risk to women for that reason, but I'm not sure Franny's video here will ever mention that.
We've all heard the fun little saying tossed around by old men at a bar. A master key can open many locks, but a shitty lock is opened by many keys. This saying encapsulates a very damaging way of thinking about sex and virginity that almost everyone has experienced in some shape or form.
I wouldn't say being modest and conservative about sex is necessarily a bad thing. Sure, there's extremes on both sides, but I'm definitely going to lean more towards the less sex and partners being preferable over the liberal, progressive, regressive, Franny side that pushes being a slutty, degenerate, disease-infested sex addict. And there's many more reasons promiscuity is not a good thing besides STDs. That's only the beginning. Overall, it's just not as good for people's mental health, especially women. The more sex partners a girl has, for example, makes them less and less likely they're going to end up happy, married, and in a committed relationship one day that's functional. It messes with your head sometimes, basically. Not for everyone, certainly, but it can take a toll on many sane, normal people.
While if you're a girl and you decide to have sex with a lot of people, you're suddenly a slut. But if you're a virgin, you're pure. In other words, if you're not exactly what society expects, you get a nice big old bucket of shame. So I think it's important to ask, why the f*** does society care if you
I noticed you're doing a lot of extra cursing in this episode, Franny. I think that's 5 or 6 times so far. And I find this very interesting because I'm aware you make this show yourself. You edit and produce your own videos here for Decoded, so what's up with the self-censorship? If you're gonna curse to try and sound cool and trashy and down with having sex with everyone, well, it kinda negates your point when you bleep yourself out, don't you think? Makes you sound phony and forced, and also a bit hypocritical. And also, your shirt looks like a brown toga or some kind of dark window curtain. Not a good look.
And to figure this out, we're gonna have to go back to the Middle Ages. A more noble time when lords and ladies smelled like buttholes and young female virgins were exchanged between families during marriage for money. Ooh, I love romance!
I guess instead of using black and white photography to shame white people for racism from 100 years ago, which is Franny's usual shtick, well, this time, she's using medieval portraits and stories in order to vilify prudes and other people who aren't sex positive like her. Well done. And let me just be clear here on my stance real quick, because I wouldn't necessarily say I'm anti-sex at all, not by any means. Adults can have sex with whoever they want, and sleeping around sometimes is even okay, especially when you're young and in college or something. I just don't like this super liberal to the extreme stance Franny seems to be taking. Sex positive always sounds like it's pushing people into being sluts, to me, which seems like an overcorrection to the problem.
For much of Western history, marriage was not really about love, like at all. It was largely an economic transaction between families. And before paternity tests and the Maury show existed, the main way men could assure that their kids were actually theirs was to take a virgin bride.
So I'm not a big fan of these trips down memory lane Franny likes to take. It's kind of her thing at this point. She seems to be trying to do a bit of a history lesson on these subjects, but I think going back hundreds of years into the 1400s is a bit much for this. We need only go back a few decades to get a real grasp on modern American views on sex and intercourse. And I hate to break it to Franny, but America is already mostly sex positive at this point. Think about it. In the 1950s, America was all about getting married young, having kids, and buying a house, while you worked a steady job, a 9 to 5. Nowadays, people don't get married until almost their 30s. They live at home longer too and work part-time, off-schedule kind of jobs. And overall, people develop their families slower and later in life, in the modern 2018 era. But that doesn't mean millennials don't want sex still. Everyone has that primal instinct and that need after puberty, so the rules of the game have changed a bit, so to speak. The rules may change, but the game stays the same. I think works here. And another influence in American culture would be the church, who has seen a steady decline over recent decades, thus resulting in less and less people adhering to its more strict views on sex. So I would say the United States is already pretty sex positive, so to speak. Most people aren't very religious or prude at all, not like the old days. And you can see this in your day-to-day. It's all reflected in modern history, the news, media, television, and movies. Let me put it this way. There's no big blockbuster movies about puritanical Christians not wanting to have sex until they're married. In fact, we see quite the opposite all the time. Now, with all that said, I think we could see Franny's stroll down memory lane here is a bit much. She goes way too far back and doesn't even address the real ways our modern society feels about the issue. I mean, who is out there seeking virgins and shaming people for having sex? Who does that? Maybe there's like 1 or 2% of the country who are hardcore Christians still and would do something like that, but for the most part, it seems like Franny is just cherry-picking points throughout history in order to build up her argument, which is attacking a non-problem in the United States.
And if you think the idea of virginity being worth money and virginity testing as some relic of the past, consider that some women have recently sold their virginity online for millions of dollars, and that the United Nations spoke out against virginity testings in 2014.
Well, some people like buying used cars, sure, but there are many others who will fork up the extra cash for a brand new one. There's a sort of extra pleasure in knowing that you're the first to be inside of your ride, the first to shift its gears, pop its clutch, or hit the gas pedal and take a spin around the block, if you know what I'm saying.
And while there is absolutely nothing wrong with the choice to remain a virgin, the flip side of putting such an extreme value on virginity is, you guessed it, slut shaming. And in our society, it seems like all you need to do to get slut shamed is, I don't know, be a woman?
If you say so, Franny. As I said earlier, I think modern America is pretty much past slut shaming, besides a few insignificant outliers. And I know my family, friends, and communities growing up, and even until now, I never heard much slut shaming at all, if any. Everything's pretty sex positive out there, really. So I would say if Franny is getting slut shamed, it's probably because of 1 or 2 reasons. Either A, her family and community are prude, strict, and anti-sex, or B, Franny is just so slutty to the extreme, it even looks bad to the modern American, mostly sex plus standards. Either way, I wouldn't be blaming this on all of our society, as she puts it. I never liked the way this show or other SJWs give this sort of mythical omnipresence to our society. Our society is just people in our lives. Our friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors. That's what society is really made up of. And I have to say, my society has a pretty fair, level-headed view on sex. It's okay to have, of course, and sleeping around can even be cool sometimes. Just don't overdo it. And use protection always, of course. Basic stuff like that, but apparently, according to Franny, her society shames all women for having sex. And whether or not that's because she hangs out with prudes or she's a total freak, that's all still TBD, to be determined.
A 2011 survey found that 46% of high school girls have experienced slut shaming, and many girls who have been slut shamed have body image issues. Even depression, anxiety, and other mental health struggles are linked to slut shaming.
Yeah, everyone has mental health problems these days, I get it. Sounds to me like Franny is just trying to garner sympathy for women though. And as I said before, they can get pregnant, so there's a totally legitimate, reasonable explanation for discouraging girls to be promiscuous in sex. Also, what about the boys? I know liberals like Franny only care about girls, but guys can have the same kinds of pressure put on them regarding sex, just in different ways. While girls are encouraged to not have sex, many times guys are encouraged too. So while being a virgin is a virtue for a girl, a boy being called a virgin is an insult. Now, I'm not saying this is a big issue to be too worried about. Schools will always have their bullies, but I do find it interesting that MTV Decoded is starting their focus on the women's side here. Pretty interesting.
And before you jump into the comments and say, well, what about men. Well, yes, let's talk about how this double standard impacts men.
Oh, okay. So she is going there. She's going to talk about the guy's side. This should be good.
Society insisting that men need to be aggressive, violent, and constantly having sex also harms them. Because just as overly sexualizing women reduces them to merely sexual objects, overly sexualizing men and tying their masculinity to the number of people they've slept with also reduces them to sexual objects.
Is that so bad though? I mean, we are sexual objects. Humans are made to have sex after all. We fit together like puzzle pieces. And it's how we've survived so many generations. So it makes perfect sense for the men who have had the most sex to be praised. Because they've traditionally had the most partners, lovers, and eventually the most children and ancestors too. So there's also a Charles Darwin angle to this if you think about it. Survival of the fittest applies here since the only bloodlines that carry on in humans are the ones who are able to get laid and make babies. So essentially, the ability for human men to seduce and sleep with women is a great genetic benefit, and thus it also provides men with deserved social and community praise and status. Women, on the other hand, are a whole different story because, as I said before, they have a different dynamic to their world experience, and also they are the ones who carry and have the babies. This makes their investment in these sex situations much more significant, and that's why sex is more important to females too. Not to mention, women can die if they get pregnant in childbirth, and they had previously died during childbirth a great deal more before the dawn of hospitals and modern medicine. So actually, not having as much sex is just as much a genetic and survival instinct for women as having more sex is for men. It all makes perfect sense when you think about it a little bit. So I really don't get why Franny and MTV have a problem here. Really, I think this whole bit is so Franny can feel better about sleeping around more or something. I really wouldn't put such a personal, biased reason past her.
But if women are only allowed to be sluts or pure angels, and if men are only allowed to be losers or sex studs, we're leaving very little room for any of us to breathe, which isn't cool. Unless that's what you and your partner are into. In that case, make sure you play it safe. And we'll see you next time right here on Decoded.
Jesus Christ, you want to end on telling everyone to choke out their sex partners? Saying that's okay? Not the best message for your preteen audience, Franny. In the end, while I wouldn't say this virginity video is as bad or offensive as MTV's other ones about race and hating white people, but it's certainly a very ill-informed and biased one. Franny makes a lot of wide-sweeping assumptions, assuming the whole world is feeling slut-shamed just because maybe it happened to her or something. I don't know. I don't see this kind of stuff happening around me, really. So I'm not going to take Franny's word for it on this one. She clearly appears to have a dog in this fight. She's biased and doing her best to defend women too, clearly. When really I don't think there's much left to defend here. America is as sex positive as it should be right now. Going any further would lead too far into the extreme. I know Franny wants everyone to accept her oversexed, lady in the streets, freak in the sheets lifestyle, but that's not going to happen if you ask me. What do you guys think? Is slut shaming a problem in our society? Have you been slut shamed at all any time in your life? And is there a virginity double standard? I think you could at least say there is one, but after all my explanations, I also think it makes perfect sense. Comment your thoughts and everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. We'll see y'all next time.